Hi, Jordan. Thank you so much for coming on to Venture with Grace today.
No, thanks for having me. I'm excited for this.
Okay, to start off the show, why don't we give the audience a little bit of your background? You were working at, oh, you were like a mentorship director at StarX before, and then prior to that, you worked at like General Catalyst for a little bit, and then prior to and then like overall, you also work at McKinsey, and like you worked at different startups and everything. So like to give the audience a little bit of your background, why don't we start with like your story on like how you got into venture and tech?
Yeah, for sure. So going back to school, I studied computer science at Stanford. I focused on AI as my concentration, which, thankfully has been pretty useful the last couple of years. And like you said, I was the first mentorship director at StartX, which is Stanford Startup Accelerator program.
By the way, I just visited them again. Like I visited the CEO like 2 days ago, and then they were like thriving. I love the environment there, and I feel like StarX is like, yeah, it's just amazing.
Yeah, no, I have a ton of respect for the program. It's definitely thrived since I was there. Definitely much better now, but yeah, it's an awesome program. As mentorship director, I was responsible for bringing in all the mentors to the program, and I interviewed all the mentors prior to bringing them in, which included a lot of VCs. And I got to sit in their office hours and their workshops and things like that. And I got to see what a good VC is like and what a not so good VC is like. That's what really sort of sparked my interest in the program in VC.
What
And
is
then
a
from there,
not so good VC like anyway?
yeah, I think a not so good VC is someone who's very prescriptive in terms of how you should run your company. I think the best VCs are ones that, sort of put up a mirror in front of the founder and get them to really think through how the company is today. Have you thought of these alternate ways of going about certain things? And ultimately, they provide the best advice, but they leave it to the founder to really decide the what direction they should go in. And obviously, a good VC is one who is still hands on, but not too hands on. They're willing to step in and be in the trenches, but if you're a former operator, not getting sort of trying to overtake the founder in their role.
Mhm. Totally.
Yeah. And so that was a really cool experience. And from there, I was like, I'll put it off for a bit and I'll go work in some startups and things like that. And so I ended up working in 4 startups across engineering, product, pre-sales, things like that. I was fortunate to see every stage. I was employee 175, 250, and 1,000. Very unintentional how that worked out, but some cool journeys there. And so was at Call 9, first engineer there, which was a YC company back in the day, built out their tech product. Was at RelateIQ, which is a Redpoint company, was bought by Salesforce for 400. Was at Palantir as a forward deployed engineer. And then finally at C3.ai, I led teams of data scientists there on the pre-sales team prior to them going public. And as you said, I also, I don't mention this all the time, but was at McKinsey for a little bit. And so spent some time there really learning the business side of things. Um, and through all that, I thought back to my StartX days and, still wanted to do VC. And so I woke up one day at C3 and said, I might as well go try out this VC thing. Joined Unusual Ventures as sort of my first foray into the field. And then I've been at Redpoint for 2.5 years now. I'm a partner on the early stage team and focus on dev tools and infrastructure, AI, the fun things like that.
Amazing. So I wanted to like because since like I'm personally non-technical, I would love to get an overview of how the money flow in the dev tool industry as a whole, and what are some subsectors that you feel like are um things that you're excited about.
Yeah. I think that there's a lot. I would say on sort of, there's a lot in AI right now, right? And so we're continuing to sort of look across, dev tools and infra on the AI side, whether it's, ETL for vectors, whether it's agents. I think there's going to be a lot of sort of opportunity this year. I think right now they don't really work fully at this point, but I think there's going to be a lot of innovation there. And then obviously, there's a lot of hype right now on sort of the multimodal side of things. I think that there's a movement in architectures towards this object-based storage, which is basically, running your infrastructure on S3. There's a lot of advantages there to, speed, or rather cost. And so there's companies like WarpStream, which is on the streaming side running on S3, OLTP databases like Neon, vector DBs like TurboPuffer, and a bunch of others there. So I think that that's really interesting. And then, I think that there's a lot of opportunity in AI applications in dev tools. And so like, observability, whether it's, using AI to do instant response, figure out, what is going wrong when an incident happens, and really using AI to diagnose and then remediate. And then finally, I think there's a lot of opportunity, and there's been a lot of hype recently in the last 6 months about workflow orchestration systems. We're invested in a company called Restate, which is from the creators of Apache Flink, incredible team. And they are effectively built this, what they call durable async wait, which allows you to really build resilient distributed systems that can execute in a really durable manner across both asynchronous and synchronous workflows. And so those are a few things, but obviously, there's many, many more exciting things going on in dev tools and infra right now.
Totally. I wonder when you are thinking about these different technologies, I guess like how do you discover the best company in the industry? As a small angel investor, I feel like I come across these like different um tools like in basically in the data science space or like fine-tuning tools and everything. I feel like I don't really know where they fall under a specific spectrum, and like the also like the competitors in the space. I wonder if you're, let's say, if you are putting money into smaller companies or like more earlier stage companies, how do you kind of quickly evaluate the deal?
Got it. Yeah. I have a lot of thoughts on this, and I've also written about it. I
Mhm,
think there's different sort of vectors that we evaluate dev tool companies on. I would say like there's two segmentations to start.
mhm,
One is the stage of the company. Is it a
mhm,
seed stage, Series A, growth stage? And then the second is whether it's an open source company or not. And so I'll talk a lot about I'll start with at least open source early stage,
mhm,
since one of the most common questions we get asked is, "How are you going to evaluate me? What should
mhm,
my goals be? What should the
mhm,
traction be by the time I go to raise?" And so I actually did a study on this. I took 80 open source companies
mhm,
and I tracked them from about 2020 to 2023. And I said, what is their open source metrics or their revenue and all their related business metrics at the time they raised their seed? And then what are
mhm,
their metrics at the time that they raised their Series A? And so I'll walk through how we evaluate a dev tool infra company, as well as sort of
mhm,
give the findings of that data.
mhm,
Um, the first is, there's the revenue question, right? How much revenue do I need as, say, an open source company? And the findings were pretty interesting. It was at the seed stage, only 7.5% actually had any revenue at the time of the seed. And only 26% of Series A companies had revenue at the time of the Series A. And the ones that actually had revenue had nowhere close to 1 million ARR, or sort of the typical Series A metric.
mhm,
And so what that showed is revenue is not the most important thing that we look for in an open source dev tool infra company. Obviously, if you have it and you have all the other things I'll talk about, then you're in really good
mhm,
shape. But at the same time, we sort of treat dev tool infra open source things as sort of consumer social networks, like where the important aspect at
mhm,
the beginning is really building up your community, getting people talking about it, excited about it. And that's sort of the most paramount thing I would say. The second sort of layer of that is open source metrics, right? And there's a bunch of different types of metrics that we use to evaluate. One is GitHub stars. And a lot of people are like, well, stars are vanity metrics. They don't really matter. Um, they sort of do matter a little bit in the sense that, VCs write scripts to track them. They like seeing that up into the right graph. And so it's sort of like a resume where it will
mhm,
get you in the door to VCs if you have really strong star growth, but it's not going to, get you necessarily the funding. And so the data showed that seed companies had about 2,800 stars on average at the time of their
mhm,
raise, and then Series A's had about 5,300 stars. Um, on the star side, we sort of recommend 10% average growth rate. The data showed about 8% month over month. The second aspect of open source metrics is contributors, right? It really shows that you have a strong base of super passionate people. They're contributing code or integrations, new languages, all these things, and it allows you to focus on other parts of the product. And so what the data showed was about 24 contributors at the time of the seed and about 50 contributors at the time of the Series A. And again, sort of like 10% month over month growth is what we recommend at Redpoint, and also what we saw in the data. And then, third from there is Slack and Discord. So do they have an active Slack and Discord community? Is that growing? Again, looking at the data, it was about 300 members for seed, and then about 1,200 members for Series A. The data showed sort of growing 20% month over month. We still recommend that, 10% month over month growth rate. And then finally, on the downloads and users and things like that is obviously the last metric. There's a famous sort of community builder named John O'Bacon. He recommends like 30% growth in this area. And that's another thing that we look at. So that's on sort of the community metric side. So we have revenue in bucket A, community metrics bucket B. C is really like the quality of the use case and the companies using it, right? And so if you have really good companies, unfortunately VCs love their sexy logos, and so like having a Databricks or a Stripe or something like that. And then it's the use case. Is this being used in production? Is this being used by a solo engineer or a team of engineers? Is this solving a critical workload or infra task? And so digging into sort of that. And then finally, there's like the intangible metrics. It's the, non sort of quantitative, but your team, is this a team that we call it founder market fit, but they're sort of destined to solve this problem. They have a ton of empathy to the market that they're creating for, as well as their storytelling capabilities. The market size, is this a massive market? And sort of going from there. And so I know I just sort of bored your listeners with a whole ton of stuff, but I would
No,
say that
this is so helpful. Honestly, I feel like this is extremely helpful, and I really like that you kind of gave us the benchmark of like, let's say, seed stage, they supposed to have 28 stars, and like 24
2,800,
contributors.
just to be clear there.
2,800. Yeah,
Yeah,
2,800. I'm sorry. I like literally wrote the wrong
all
thing. But
good.
I know like Series A is 5,300 stars. And so basically I feel like those are really great benchmarks for people to take a look at. I wonder, like, is this only about a certain type of dev tool, or like is this like every dev tool included? Because I
Yeah.
feel like there's so much subsectors, and if we're using like them to judge the overall spectrum, it's like too broad, or like what does this like apply for in general? And also, like, when you are selecting deals in this sector, I know like Redpoint has a lot of amazing has invested in a lot of amazing to be companies, like Snowflake, Stripe, Twilio, like just so many amazing superstar companies. But like when you're looking at the AI companies now, what are, let's say, three areas that you're the most excited about, and why?
Yeah. What I sort of went through was really on the open source side of companies. There's
Yeah.
obviously a lot of non-open source companies too. On the non-open source ones, it's, you can sort of take out the open source metrics that I talked about. And, really just evaluate, especially at the seed stage, it's very much on the team. And it's very much on sort of their vision, their storytelling, and the market opportunity. Once you get to the Series A, then it goes back to a lot of the metrics I spoke about, which is, what is their revenue and current revenue and projections, what companies are using it, and sort of looking across that. But at the end of the day, those non-quantitative metrics I mentioned are super, super important. And so, we spend a lot of time digging into the team, talking with users of the product and how are they using it and things like that. On the AI side, I think it's pretty similar, right? There's tons of teams of like researchers leaving to start companies and things like that. And so really digging into, what papers have they written? What has been the effect on the community of their work? If they're from a company like DeepMind, were these the essential people to the company as they sort of advanced in their trajectory, things like that. And so we spend a lot of time on the qualitative side, particularly because a lot of AI companies at this point, they can take a while and a lot of capital to get going. And so we understand, you're probably not going to have much of a product, especially at the seed stage at this point. And so we need to dig into those non-quantitative metrics a lot for AI companies.
I wonder, so one thing about the open source projects, and I wonder, like, when you are basically back channeling, like just to like do your due diligence on these companies, do you talk to the developers? Like, I guess like if you are starting out in investing in this space,
Mhm.
how do you kind of like build your reference check
Yeah.
framework?
So it's a couple of things. One is, we've built up our AI network quite a lot at Redpoint.
Mhm.
We have an unsupervised learning podcast, which everyone should
Mhm.
check out. But we bring on founders of companies like Databricks and Hugging
Mhm.
Face and Perplexity
Mhm.
and others. And then we also, know a bunch of researchers in the field. And so a lot of it is reaching out to them and say, hey, is this a problem that you face when you're, creating AI models or taking, public models? Um, and so first is sort of digging into subject matter experts in the space. Um, if they have a product, then we will definitely go and talk to users or customers of the product. And again, it goes back to some of those metrics, but what is the use cases being used for? Are you using it in production? Would you pay for this if you're not already paying for this? Things like that. And then, finally, we will, do background references and really talk with folks that have worked with these people in the past to really get a sense of, are they good people? Are they
Mhm.
capable? Are they considered best in, their field? And do they have sort of the grit to be able to create a really long lasting, massive company?
I wonder, let's say if they are, like, I guess, like, if they're a YC company, assuming you could ask, like, other YC badge, but what if they are non-super obvious? They come from, like, um, non-super popular companies, or, like, you don't know anybody in the company that they work for in the past. Like, how do you kind of, like, do the background reference check?
Yeah, I mean, hopefully they've worked at some companies in the past. It doesn't need to be your, Databricks, OpenAI, whatever it is, where we could chat with just, someone they've managed and get a sense of them as a manager and will they be able to lead a team and recruit well? Hopefully we can chat with someone who managed them. Are they receptive to feedback? Were they capable in sort of the product that they built and the task given to them? So we still, even if they didn't come from those sort of known Silicon Valley background, tried to do those things. Um, and yeah, we sort of try to apply the same sort of rigor. The benefit of sort of coming from a OpenAI or something like that is typically a lot of people at those companies that you can then recruit and bring on. You've seen sort
Mhm.
of best in class, and so we totally back people of all backgrounds. But then we still want to dig into do they have a good network? Will they be able to recruit well? And have they sort of built a best in class product? And a lot of this, say they have an open source project and that's really taking off, that does a lot of validation in and of itself if they've created an incredible developer experience product where we can really dig into the open source code and see, is this a really talented developer that we think we should partner with?
When you are thinking about, let's say, the OpenAI people recruiting OpenAI people, so I feel like there's a lot of deep technical talent in the Silicon Valley talent pool. A lot of people can create really strong technical mode, especially coming from, like, the researchers, like you mentioned, like a lot of people that are maybe written really good papers, or have like really deep technical knowledge. But how do you examine them, like, in their, like, go-to-market storytelling ability? Because I think people could, I feel like I get the general sense of, like, people could be really, really technical and then focusing a lot of the technical storytelling. But when it comes to selling to customers, how do you examine, like, which company could, succeed among all their competitors? And how do you also, like, I feel like you probably talk to all their competitors before investing in each company. I wonder what are some factors that you think are relevant in, like, w- if two company in the same space can help one company win.
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, part of it is just like the technical side is incredibly important, right? And so I don't want to discount that. And so, like, do they have some sort of technical innovation or defensibility? It could be proprietary, partnerships for data or things like that. On the founders themselves, aside from the technical side, we do really like to see a CEO or at least some of the founders who are very go to market oriented, commercial oriented, and have, a plan set out on the go-to-market side. They can have a ton of open questions. We actually would rather a founder say, I don't know the answer to that yet, but I have a couple of ideas, right? I think a good example of this, we're investors in a company called Mistral, and it's some of the, sort of world-renowned experts. They built Llama at Meta. They were at DeepMind. But, Arthur, the CEO, he's incredibly commercial oriented. He wants to create a product that, actually has revenue and sells. And so like it's finding those researchers or highly technical people that also want to create, an IPO-able massive company and have thought through sort of the go-to-market of going from whether it's free or open source or whatever, to a commercial product in the end.
As an investor, how do you kind of like help them with building up business related like go to market strategy and everything?
Yeah. I think there's a few ways, right? One is, recruiting, obviously, and just finding the right people. We have a full talent team at Redpoint. And so really figuring out, who is the go-to-market person that you need, whether it's a DevRel person, whether it's a salesperson, a marketing person, et cetera. The other thing is just, we've obviously seen a lot of successful dev tool and infra companies and AI companies, whether it is, Snowflake, Stripe, Twilio, HashiCorp, et cetera. And so it's trying to take our learnings from those and really, again, it goes back to sort of how we advise founders what a good VC is and really say, you're doing this today. Have you thought about doing this? We've seen this be successful in the past. Obviously, every company is different and some things are better for one than the others. But it's really digging in from that perspective and going deep. We also have a bunch of go-to-market experts in both our team and in our network. Travis Bryant, he's an operating partner with us. He led sales at Optimizely from 0 to 100 million ARR, head of customer growth at Front and a bunch of other companies. And so it's bringing in the right people at the right time to really help them sort of think through what does success look like. And it's also helping them figure out the goals, going back to sort of talking about what are these metrics that you need, helping them figure out what are the goals that, from what timeline should they achieve to be successful at this next stage of company.
Let's talk about like one of your like not reason, but like a couple months ago you wrote an article about like how much revenue you need or like what are the metrics for people to raise like a killer series B for developer tools. Like I feel like there's so many really interesting points, but before that I would love to learn more about like how do you do the really thorough research in the industry. I saw that you also mentioned about like other investors. How do you, I guess, like create the thinking framework of um, all the different factors that you want to cover in the article, as well as like basically what are the major discoveries that you feel like are important to that you implement in your investing strategy?
Yeah. Specifically on the Series B side, that article was sort of created by interviewing or sending out a survey to about almost 20 Series B investors that we work with a lot, that we respect. And it's the metrics that we advise founders on ourselves. What is the revenue that you need to raise a Series B typically? What is the ramp of that revenue, which is, equally important? What is the burn multiple, especially in this market environment? Burn inefficiency is even more important. Going back to like the open source metrics, I talked a lot about what they are at the C and the A, but how much do investors care about it at the B? And so, it sort of was a level check from our perspective. Are we advising our Series A companies in the right way in order to raise a successful B? So part of it is, looking at the market and seeing what is successful. Another thing that I like to do is I had another article about this. I took 28 public dev tool and infra companies, and I took their S1s and what their metrics were at the time they went public. And I looked across all of them to see what are those common traits in public dev tool companies that, as we evaluate a C or an A or a B, that we should see the potential for them to go public one day. And so a lot of it is, looking to successful companies and what was their trajectory like, what did they have at the time of going public, and ensuring that any company we invest in can follow a similar path.
Do you want to, since like maybe not all the audience have read the article in the past, like would
Yeah.
you mind to share some like key learnings from the things that you just mentioned?
Yeah, for sure. I think one of them is, looking at those like 28 companies on the public side, it was really interesting because, the first sort of layer was, there was an average ACV of around 95K. And then when you dig a level deeper, there was effectively, a breakdown in sort of the average revenue per user, but a lot of them specified the number of 6-figure contracts in their S1. And a lot of them also specified the number of 7-figure contracts. And so I think it was 75% talked about the number of 6-figure, and then it was around 40% the number of 7-figure. But a lot of them didn't specify it, but still have those level of customers. And so the interesting thing that sort of I found from the data was that even if you're a open source company, a bottom up sort of PLG company, something like that, you always need to go to the enterprise at some point in order to become a massive public company. And so, if you look at some of the companies in that, Cloudflare, 1% of their customers was 60% of their revenue. Datadog was, 6% of their customers was 72% of their revenue. GitLab, a very small number, accounted for 60% of their revenue, et cetera. So a lot of the time, we'll see companies pitch to us and they'll have a lot of free users. They'll have companies paying maybe 5 figures. But if they don't have that plan for what is the second act of the company, how are they going to add things to the product to really increase ACV? If there's not a way that we can see where they can get to 6-figure and maybe even eventually 7-figure contracts, there's probably a really difficult, a low probability that they'll be able to go public. And so I thought that was interesting. And it's really framed me from an investment perspective, figuring out, is this company actually going to be able to go IPO based on their contracts?
If you're like an angel investor or like emerging manager who are doing due diligence on these like 6-figure or 7-figure contract, first of all, like I feel like most emerging managers are not going to invest in Series B anyway. But I wonder, like when you're trying to do due diligence on the contracts people mention, because people could mention really crazy things in conversations, but I wonder, how do you how do you like basically do due diligence on all the things that they said?
Yeah, I mean, the easiest way is sort of, again, going back to like talking to experts in the field and say, if they had this solution that they're pitching or the current product, if it's already out, how much would you pay for it? What is your propensity to pay? We always ask sort of like from 1 to 10, how important of a priority is this to you? Typically, the higher on the priority list, hopefully the more they'll pay. We do talk to customers, if they're at particularly the Series A, but sometimes the seed as well, really talking to customers and seeing how much are you paying for it? How much would you pay for it over time as you scale it out in the organization? If they add these capabilities that the founders are pitching as sort of those second, third products, how would that increase your propensity to pay? And so we try to do as much diligence as we can to really get into, being able to sort of do this market size questions, right? Which is, if there's X addressable companies, they're willing to pay Y. What is that from like a market size perspective? And for a fund like Redpoint, we're a $650 million fund. To return our fund size, you need to be like a $5 billion plus company typically. And so it's really trying to get to that answer, which is this a large enough market to be able to return to our LPs?
When you are thinking about, so like from all the, for example, revenue targets or all the, revenue, like growth trajectory and everything, like, so basically when after I read your article, I wonder what is something that you would suggest people who invest in earlier stage to look at, because this is like a really great benchmark for companies that already have revenue. But
Yep.
when you're investing in like a lot earlier stage, you typically only have the team.
Yep.
But I feel like the team is like, I think like, yeah, like how would you examine if something have the potential to grow into what you have described?
Yeah. I also want to caveat, we've backed tons of seed stage and Series A startups where they've been pre-product, they've been pre-revenue. And so a lot of the data I've described is sort of, averages or medians and stuff like that. But we're very happy to back, companies without that in the right circumstances. To your question, though, at the seed stage in particular, and at the Series A, really it goes back to the team. Like we spent so much time on the team. Is this the right team? Markets change, competitors emerge, all these things happen to a startup, and they'll face inevitably many roadblocks. And so you really need to bet that this is the team that can navigate those complexities, and that they'll be able to win against the competition. So team can be a lot of things. It goes back to like, can they recruit great people? Are they technically, innovative in particular ways compared to competitors? Their storytelling capabilities is super important. When they come to present to the full team, is the full team, banging on the table to say we need to partner with this team? And the storytelling goes into raising future financing from other investors. It goes in being able to sell the company to prospective prospects, to sell to recruiting from a recruiting perspective and bringing people on. So a lot of it is really the team. And then the
Mhm.
market size, again, figuring out, do we believe that this is going to be a really big market? If it's not already, are there like tailwinds that are going to propel that? Is there a why now behind this company emerging as to why it couldn't exist beforehand? And so it's really digging into those intangibles. And again, going back to just sort of looking at the market, what's already out there, what is insufficient in existing products, things like that.
Um, let's say if you are non-technical, you're looking at like a fine-tuning company.
Yeah.
Uh, this is like kind of specific, but also in like a really broad way. How do you like? I guess like besides like the open source data you have mentioned earlier, like those are some benchmarks for people to examine like an open sourced company. What would be something that you are looking at? Also in the AI wave, there's so many different company have came up. Um, what do you identify as like maybe one of your biggest like emphasize on? And also you also mentioned about like about the team, right? So like the team could come from let's say like an OpenAI or DeepMind's like first, I don't know, 100 employee or something.
Mm-hmm.
But the other problem is um, should the strategy be like we just like really focus on like whoever leave OpenAI right now, we just invest immediately, or like what is the strategy that you kind of have for yourself when you are um thinking about investing in the next generation of like just like the best company in the next generation of like AI or infra dev tool space?
Yeah. I mean, obviously, we've passed on many OpenAI employees that have left OpenAI to do companies. We also are excited to meet them and see if they are the right founders. So it's not like you need to come from a specific background. Like taking your fine tuning as an example, there's a ton of fine tuning startups at this point. Um, and so, there's always the question, a lot of these AI sort of dev tools is how much of this is commoditized, how much of this will an OpenAI or other type of company just offer as a service. And so it goes into, the defensibility, right? Is this something that is defensible the way they're approaching it? And it comes back to the team a lot. And it's not that they we're at OpenAI or Anthropic or something like that, but it is their experience before doing this company very unique to them, right? It could be they were the person responsible at OpenAI for offering fine tuning for GPT-3 or whatever it is. Um, at the same time, it could be that they, consulted with a bunch of companies and helped them with their fine tuning, and they saw what worked at a bunch of different types of companies and use cases and industries, and that led them to a certain belief for how you should do fine tuning. They have some sort of innovation, just sort of using your example there, but it's really digging into what I called earlier, which is this founder market fit. If there's 30 fine tuning companies out there, why is this team the one, based on their experience, based on their empathy to the person that they're selling to and building for, the one that is ultimately going to capture this market? Sometimes it is from an OpenAI, and sometimes it's not, but there's a unique experience there.
Mm. When if let's say if you have like let's say 50K, what would be your investing strategy for yourself to build a portfolio as an angel investor into
Mm.
different companies? Let's say you can put like one in like 50 company, put 10K in like 5 company, whatever
Yeah.
you feel like is like a good investing strategy for you to portfolio build. What would be the type of company you put your money to and how your portfolio?
Yeah, interesting question. I would probably do something like 10 companies, 5K each. something like that, where you have some sort of diversification. You're not too concentrated in any one company. You can sort of flex based on if there's a company that is super attractive to you for whatever reason. This is the company that everyone is using and talking about. Maybe you flex up there to 10 or 15K and down in other areas. In terms of the ones that a type of company that I would like to do. Again, I sort of said this a bunch of times. I'm going to say it again. It really is the team. Like we've even encountered a bunch of startups where they'll come in and there's a lot of things to like about the company, but the founders, we just don't have that gut feeling of like, this is the person I want to partner with for 10 plus years. And so sometimes you just meet with a founder and you're like, we need to be in business with this person. Particularly from an angel perspective, you're not having to return $650 million to an LP. I would sort of focus on the founders that you really resonate with, that you really just want to be in business with. And at the end of the day, you'll hopefully make a lot of money in the angel investing side, but I think the team is the most important thing. And then the market size constraints for angel investors is very different than VCs, I'll say. A lot of companies that we pass on as a VC because we don't think it's going to be a 5-10 billion plus company are actually incredible angel investments. They will likely, there's a near 100% chance for a lot of angel investments that just given the team, they'll be able to sell at some sort of premium and you'll at least make your money back, if not make money. And that, if they sell for $500 million, that's still an incredible angel investment, right? And so I think
if you encounter these company, call me, please.
Yeah. Will do. But I think the judgment call from a market perspective, market is one of the most important things we look at as a VC, can be very different for an angel investor.
For the devtool space, we chat a little bit about the open source, and for the whole spectrum of like the infra dev tool, like and AI space. Let's say like what is like 3 subsector that you are excited about?
Good question. I think there's a lot of opportunity in the streaming space right now. I think that Confluent sort of really kicked things off with Kafka in the space, and they were sort of the champions. But I do think managing a bunch of Kafka clusters at this point is really difficult, and it can be really costly, especially as your data increases. And so I mentioned like WarpStream earlier as one example, but there's a bunch of others in the space that are really innovating at the fundamental architecture level, being able to use different types of object storage systems instead. Removing the complexities of managing local disks, all those sorts of things, I think are really interesting. So definitely interested overall in the streaming space. I think that there's still a lot of opportunity in the security space, actually. Particularly AI security, where it's both using AI to solve security use cases on SOC teams and incidents and things like that, but also securing against AI attacks, whether it's prompt injections, model poisoning, and all sorts of things there. So I think we're going to see a lot of interesting companies emerge that can be really big. And then across sort of the AI stack still, Redpoint, we've invested in a bunch of the foundation model layer like Mistral and Poolside and others. We've invested in some companies that the inference layer like Modal. But I think there's also opportunities, across, agents, across multimodal, across, extracting data across various different sources, doing personalization, I think is really cool. So being able to personalize a model on, a per user, per type of customer basis. We still haven't reached that level of fine-grained personalization. So there's some companies emerging around that. RelateIF and RLHF, taking data and being able to sort of adapt the model as you take your users' data. So I think there's a lot of interesting, categories that we're digging into right now.
You mentioned the multimodal. I've heard about this from other guests. Can you elaborate more on that space?
Yeah, and so like multimodal is basically taking multiple types of input, like a different modalities can be text, it can be images and video and audio and things like that. And so the idea is, you can feed in multiple modalities and then it can output multiple modalities. So it can output a combination of text and images and audio and things like that. You look at sort of ChatGPT and the first iteration of LLMs, it was very text oriented, right? Now we're
Mm.
seeing, Sora yesterday was awesome and super cool, where it's OpenAI released Sora and you have a video. 11 Labs and other companies are focused on the audio side. And so how can we sort of combine a lot of these sort of inputs and outputs together to do use cases that we haven't been able to do before?
Mm. We chat earlier about Mistral AI. You are a seed investor, and then now their value over $2 billion. And I wonder, can you describe like how I know that you mentioned the founder are exceptional. I wonder, how did you discover this deal? And then also, like, it sounds like it could be a really competitive deal from very early on. How do you kind of position yourself to be a investor that they want to take money from?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. So at the time of the investing, they literally started the company like a week ago. There really wasn't much to go off, and it was quite a large round. Um, in that case, it really went into the founders, where this team, they created Llama at Meta, and they did a bunch of, incredible papers at DeepMind before. And so this team, there's very few people in the world that really understand building foundation models and, creating the data sets for that and really just doing end to end. And so the fact that they had created, at the time, the most popular open source foundation model, like, it goes back to that founder market fit. They really had strong founder market fit. We also felt that, at the time, yes, Llama was available, but it wasn't commercially available. And so we felt that there could be innovation in having an quote unquote OpenAI like company, but focused on the open source side of things. And then, part of the pitch originally was, being sort of that European counterpart to OpenAI and really, building out an incredible talent team out of Europe. They're based in Paris, and just attracting the best talent out there. And so we just really felt that this team will be able to attract the best people in the world. And thankfully, it's paid off so far. Their Mixtral model and mixture of experts is doing incredibly well, and people are really excited about it. And so, yeah, we're super excited.
Is there a company that you invest lately that you could talk about, like how you encounter the team and what were things that you were looking at when you invest in them?
Yeah, and actually, I forgot to answer your other part of the question, which is how we convinced the founder to actually
Yeah.
go with us. We actually flew out to Paris to see them. And so, there's something about being in person with the founder and really building that relationship. And so, I think founders appreciate when you really make the effort to get to know them as people and, they're working really hard. And so we have to work equally hard. And so that I think went a long way as well. But really just, sharing our own thoughts on the space and why we're excited about them, going into, our network and how we think we can help out and things like that. Your question was around a company I invested in recently.
Yeah. Why don't we I want to double click on like, you guys flew to Paris to meet the team, respect that hustle. On the other hand, like, many founders would like, especially, these people come from Llama and, DeepMind, so they are probably super competitive. Like I bet, like the Sequoia of the world, so everybody just flew to Paris to meet them. Assuming that's the case, right? How would you, in that sense, like to position yourself as like a value add to, win the company?
Yeah. There's a few ways to answer that. I think one, to be honest, is just the personal relationship. It's the same thing
Mhm.
for us deciding which founders to invest in, but if you're going to partner for 10 plus years together, you need to like them as people. They need to like you as people. There needs to be sort of that relationship that you can trust the VC, that, we're all aligned in sort of where the company should go. We each have our best interests in mind in terms of doing what's best for the company. And so I wouldn't discount the relationship building aspect of winning a competitive deal. I think that's super important. And then, it really goes into like why outside of the relationship is this particular team of investors uniquely positioned the same way a founder is uniquely positioned to win the market. How are these investors uniquely positioned to help them out? Um, and so, we have our podcast, and like we're going to have Arthur on that very soon, to talk about Mistral. And, we've built out our network of AI folks, potential customers that we can intro. We made a bunch of customer intros. Um, we, have a, want to dive into with him into the go-to-market and help out in those various areas. And we've talked a lot about how we've done a lot of open source companies in the past. We were early investors in Hashicorp, ClickHouse, CockroachDB, MotherDuck, and DuckDB, and a whole bunch of other companies. And so being able to sort of take those lessons from really successful companies that have gone the open source path before, and impart those learnings. And so, we feel in that case that we have investor market fit, for lack of a better way of putting it. So it's really, trying to go through all these things with the founders and also just demonstrate our excitement. I think showing excitement as an investor, genuine excitement, and how much we really want to partner with the team is really important as well.
At what point do you do customer intro, or do you like, because I think there's kind of like a chicken and egg problem,
Yeah.
in like a maybe like on a high level, because I feel like if you introduce them too early, like, what if you didn't get the deal?
Yeah.
And but if you invest, like, but if you really want to win them over, like, you have to demonstrate something that you can provide the value. Of course, you can say, "Oh yeah, let me introduce you to XYZ company," but yeah, I wonder like how does the deal winning process look like? Um, and also like in terms of like, you also mentioned like you guys have invested in some amazing companies like Hashicorp, like other like open source companies. What are the learnings that you could share with the team to make yourself sounds like, very helpful? But also like not, I don't really know if you gave the whole pitch at the beginning, or like how does the process look like to, share your learning to the team? Also, I would love to learn about the learnings too, but anyway, keep going.
um, yeah. So the first part of that question, sorry, what was the first part of that question?
Like customer intro,
Right,
like.
right, customer interest. So, on the customer interest side, we meet with companies. We like to build the relationship over a long period of time, if possible. So sometimes a company just raises seed, and we'll reach out and meet with them right after the seed. And we don't love shotgun weddings where hey, we have 24 hours to meet each other and decide if we want to partner for a very long and so we try to avoid that if possible. But, say we meet with a company 12 months before their next round, we'll start trying to make customer intros, as soon as they're ready for them, they have a product, or if they just want to do validation with potential customers. So we try to make those intros well in advance, and try to show value. There have been a bunch of companies we've forwarded recruiting intros to well in advance of doing any sort of potential raise. And, it's really a competitive market. You mentioned it yourself. And so the more that we can show value and that we actually are excited about the company and care and can help them, the better. So we try to do that well in advance.
What if you like introduce them to their core engineering team and the core salespeople, and then they pick someone else to invest in?
I mean, look, it's happened to us before. It's happened to other VCs I
Oh
know,
no.
and it's unfortunate when that happens. But at the same time, it's it is what it is, right? And so again, like we still try to show value, and it's a long game, sort of the venture, relationship where, we may end up leading a later round. We also have a growth team on our side. And so even if we show value and they don't pick us for this round, maybe they'll do a later one. Maybe they'll, after this startup, they'll do another startup, and we still have that goodwill, and we'll continue to build that relationship over time. And so, it obviously sucks when lose a partnership opportunity that you're super excited about, but at the same time,
Also, the major thing is like if you like made a lot of effort to invest in this company before you invest in them, and then like at that point you already leverage the resources to help this particular company, but you can't really invest in the similar company later on just because of like you already kind of like port your resources into this. I don't know. Like I don't know if that ever happened to you, but like I'm just like thinking about these like scenarios to like navigate.
yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, I mean, look, we can make some intros on the recruiting side, on the customer interest side, but if we come across another team that for whatever reason, we think is, later on after the company didn't choose us, that we think is actually an even better opportunity for partnership, we still go ahead and do that. We don't look at it as a sunk cost, which is, oh, we helped that other company. Now we can't partner with any other company in the space. And look, building an IPO-able company is going to take a lot more effort than whatever customers we introduce or recruiting potential employees we introduce. And so there's a lot more that we can help out with along the way. And there's a lot more that goes into really creating a big company than the value that we added in that short period of time.
Totally. I wonder, you also mentioned that like there's a lot of like insights that you would share with a company like Mistral AI, or like because you guys have a lot of like great investment in the open source space. What were some core lessons besides the one that you already shared about like, the core metrics about the stars and
Yeah.
stuff? So,
I think a lot of it is on it's sort of hard to share generalizable lessons because each company is so different. On the open source side, a lot of the decision making goes into what is that separation between your open source product and your commercial product.
mm,
And with open source, the hard part about it is that once you open source a feature or the product, taking it back and going non-open source for anything is
mhm,
really, really hard, if not
mm,
impossible, for early stage
mm.
startups where you alienate the community, they get really upset, and that trust with the community is the most important thing. And so a lot of it is really just digging into the products with each company and figuring out, hey, this could be open source, this could be the commercial product, et cetera. And so it's going through just the various sorts of models from an open source perspective and helping them think through the go-to-market. Um, yeah.
What does the go-to-market look like for open source companies? Also, this is not open source, but you mentioned earlier, some of the big company in the SaaS space are, 1% of their customer contribute most of the
Yeah.
amount of value. How do they find the 1% of customer that
Yeah.
will pay?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think like sort of the benchmark that I've heard a lot is like 2% of your open source users will become paid customers. Obviously, that
Mhm,
changes depending on the type of company, but
mhm,
a small percent of your open source users should become paid. In terms of how you find those users, a lot of it is, you know, trying to instrument your product in some way, shape, or form. Sometimes that can be difficult with open source companies, but really trying to figure out, based on the type of companies, your ideal customer profile that ends up converting. So you narrow down your users to your ICP. And based on their usage of the product, maybe they start using a particular feature of the product that usually is the lever to convert to a commercial plan. Maybe it's the quantity of the usage. Once they expand to a certain number of users using it, once they're using it for deploys on a daily basis or whatever that is, right? You look for those specific levers that will lead to each of the consecutive stages in the funnel. On the go-to-market side for open source, or at least how you can monetize open source, um, there's a few ways. I mean, it started out, the early open source companies were based on services. The crowning example of this was Red Hat, where they sort of dominated the Linux service market. And, I would say that is the worst way to do it now, and that, that's very cost intensive. It's not software oriented, et cetera. The most common way nowadays for commercializing open source is on the hosting side. And basically what this means is that a provider provides sort of a SaaS offering of their product that's fully managed, and they handle all the infrastructure and complexities of running it. And examples of this are Databricks, Confluent Cloud, MongoDB Atlas, their SaaS product, Elastic Cloud, and a bunch of others. We typically see this most commonly in hardcore sort of infrastructure companies where managing, really high level workloads at a highly resilient that need to be super fast. Doing that by yourself without this hosted offering is really hard, requires a ton of people to maintain it. And so you see that in the core infra companies a lot on the hosted side. Um, the other way of doing it is what we call open core, which is effectively you provide some part of your product in the open source, or if you're not open source, a free plan, and then you reserve some features for the enterprise plan. A couple of the levers that we tend to see this in is, the open source product is for a solo developer, the paid product is for a team or full company where you have collaboration features, things like that. Or you see it where you have a free product, but then the commercial product is an enterprise grade product. You have
mm,
security features like SOC 2, and SLAs, et cetera. And so, the important thing here is that, different strategies are different for different types of companies, right? I mentioned on the infra side, we see a lot of hosted offerings where that makes a lot of sense. It makes a little bit less sense for application type of companies that are open source, where you don't see quite as much value on the hosted side typically, just because it's easier to do it yourself and maintain the app side. So it really depends, but those are like a few of the different ways.
Mm, I really love that. I wonder, like, how do you educate yourself in the space continuously?
Yeah, the main thing is talking to just practitioners, and so reaching out to just people that have written a lot in the space or are known to really just have a lot of knowledge, and just talking to them, sharing our perspectives on open source and what's exciting right now, and hearing theirs. A lot of it is just working with open source companies. I mentioned beforehand, we've worked with a lot, both that have been super successful and not successful, and really imparting those lessons to the founders we work with, and just continuing to sort of digest, with each company we work with, what is a lesson from our side that we can then impart to future founders. And then just a lot of reading, scrolling through hacker news and different things online, and really just sort of seeing what is resonating in the community right now. And I
What?
guess the last thing I didn't say is talking to buyers, right? We
Mhm.
spend a lot of time talking to potential buyers, whether it's VPs of Eng or things like that, to really figure out what is top of mind for them, what open source tools are they using that they're excited about, stuff like that.
How do you systemize this learning journey? I really like the last part about talking to buyers. This is something that I've been doing as like a tiny angel investor. But I feel like by the time that like a big company that to like are planning on using these like smaller companies like tools, that the smaller companies is not so small anymore. I wonder, how do you kind of systemize your learning journey, also capture the deals that are in a more early stage when they didn't really technically have the really VP of Eng at a big company or something as their
Yeah,
customer.
Yeah, I mean, I think that a lot of open source companies, they don't go straight to the VP of Eng, right? And there's really more of a bottoms up movement. I mentioned earlier, it's like a social network. And the idea is
Mhm.
that you get
Yeah.
lots of people, maybe one Eng will adopt it and they'll tell their friends at the company to adopt it. And, hopefully sooner rather than later, you have teams adopting it and more and more.
Mhm.
Where then, I call it a pincer motion. You have sort of the bottom up going on. And then once you identify, hey, this company has 20 engineers using it, then either you reach out as part of a sales motion to their VP of Eng and say, hey, we noticed 3 teams are using our product. Can you chat? Right. Or what ends up happening a lot of the time is the engineers themselves will end up sort of percolating it up in the hierarchy, where then the VP of Eng sees it and says, hey, maybe I should get a company contract with this. And so a lot of it is figuring out, like, how do you get that, you know, bottoms up adoption going for an open source company to the point that you can go to these leaders at the end of the day.
Mm. Um, if you're in like, so I know that you guys exit as a fund, but like I guess like if you're like an angel investor or people who are investing in like early stage as a solo GP or something, what's your like thought on like exiting before it because people don't typically exit in like a very early stage. It's a bad
Yeah.
signal, all that kind of stuff. I wonder, how do you think about exiting when it comes to investing in the infra or dev tool space?
Yeah. Part of it depends on your fund. We have a fairly large fund. And so,
Mhm,
in order to make our LPs happy and for us to keep our job, we need to have those large exits.
mhm,
At the end of the day, though, we try to be founder friendly at Redpoint, where, it's a conversation with the founder. Say they get an acquisition offer at the A or the B or whatever it is. Um, obviously, if the company is doing really well, we would like it to keep going and get bigger and bigger. But if the founder, for whatever reason, has a strong propensity to sell the company and it would be life changing for them, we have that conversation and we want to support them. Again, it goes back. Founders are our most important asset, and we want to have good references and make sure they're happy. And so, it's always a conversation and figuring out, why do they want to sell? Is this best for the company? Is this best for themselves? And so, we've had acquisitions earlier on that in companies we think could have been, potentially IPOable in the future. But, the founders at the end of the day are the ones that have the most at stake and are in this, 24/7. And so it's respecting their wishes as well.
Mm. What do you think is like, I want to be mindful of the time. This will be my last real question. Um, like what do you think is the biggest challenge and risk in the dev tool slash infra slash AI and security space?
Yeah, there's a lot. I mean, on the plus side, some of the largest companies in the world are those types of companies. A few things. One is, particularly like on the open source side, or even just most dev tools as a whole, they're sort of like community social networks, I've said, which is like, they may not have a product out, or it may be very early innings, and sometimes you just don't know how the dev community is going to react and if it will
Mhm.
take off, right? So it's sort of like investing in consumer companies sometimes. On the open source side, there's the risk of, depending on your license and stuff, but a cloud provider, coming in and just swooping the product and offering their own hosted product. A great example of this is Redis, where, AWS Redis has billions in revenue and far eclipses Redis, the company's own product and revenue. And so there's always the risk there, which can scare off people from going open source. Um, I think the other thing is just devs are hard to get over and pay
Mhm.
money a lot of the time.
Mm.
And so there's always the risk there. And then I would say on the capital side, certain types of companies, particularly on the infra side, like databases, they take a lot of capital to get going. And there's a lot of trust involved. If you're using Mongo or Confluent or any of these sorts of hardcore infrastructure that's powering a lot of their products, if those products go down, you're not in a really good state. You will lose a lot of revenue typically. And so getting a company to trust a new database or something like that with their hardcore infrastructure can take a lot of trust building and can take a lot of time for some of these companies to really see momentum and traction. And sometimes they just never get there. And so that's also a really big risk.
Mm, totally. Thank you so much, Jordan, for sharing with us today. I want to end with like a 1 minute fire round, if it's okay with you.
Okay, sure.
Okay. Number one, what's your favorite book?
Name of the Wind. It's actually a fantasy book. They're making it into an HBO show and movie and stuff. So highly recommend it. But it's just incredible writing, incredible story.
Who made the biggest impact in your career?
Um, I would say my dad, to be totally honest. He's worked super hard his entire life, but also been able to, balance family and be there at, when I needed him. And he's just a role model for me.
What does, by the way, what does he do? Is he also in the investing space or tax space?
There's a fire truck coming by.
No,
Sorry
I
about
hear it. Oh my God.
that. He is a corporate attorney.
Amazing. Who would you invite to your dinner party?
Who would I invite to my dinner party? Um, let's see here. On the non-tech side, I would say Lin-Manuel Miranda. I'm a huge
The
Broadway
non-tax side.
fan. This is just any sort of dinner. I would say him. I'm a huge Broadway fan. Love Hamilton, In the Heights, and all that. And then on the tech side, this is I would probably say Satya Nadella, to be totally honest. And I just think
Same.
that he's one of the best CEOs of our generation, and probably ever. And
Mm,
I've just been super impressed with what, Microsoft went from a super non-sexy company to one of the most attractive companies in the world. And so I just think there's a lot to learn from him.
for sure. Where can we find you outside of work?
Um, Outside of work, like online or just like in general?
Hey, it's wherever you spend the most time.
Okay,
So it could
cool.
be both.
Yeah, yeah. I play a lot of pickleball and squash. You'll probably see me on the courts there. I'm a big foodie, so try out a lot of restaurants and stuff. And then, on the work side, I'm on Twitter, so you can follow me there. I have a Substack called Segfault, which is a lot of writing on dev tools and infrastructure, a lot
Yeah.
of the type of
Definitely
content
check
we
out
talk
the
about.
Substack. I really like the Substack, and I feel like, although I'm non-technical, but I feel like I feel like I definitely benefit a lot from like just like reading through it. Even I feel like I probably understand like less than 50% of things, but I really like it.
Awesome. Thank
Um,
you.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Jordan, for coming on the show today.
No, this was a lot of fun. I really appreciate you having me.
Let me quickly end